Well, I appreciate y'all accelerating the program a little bit tonight so that I can stop speaking into a microphone before Sabbath. So I speak quickly normally, so forgive me if I start speaking so quickly that only dogs can hear me at a certain point here. So tonight I want to talk about what I think is going on in the conservative movement, and that is a battle over central principles. Because the fact is that President Trump won, which is fantastic, and Republicans control Congress, which is fantastic, but all of these victories don't necessarily mean that there is tremendous agreement in the country over the philosophy that ought to rule the United States, the philosophy that ought to govern the United States. So tonight I want to talk about central principles and refocusing on central principles because the aphrodisiac of power sometimes overcomes our own need and our own desire to speak what is true. So what is our central principle? Obviously, our central principle, what brings us all here tonight, something I think we all agree on, is the idea that America is founded on the notion of God-given rights protected by government. The only rationale for government is to protect those God-given rights. And there are really three elements of this, right? God-given, right? Why are they God-given rights? They're God-given rights because the idea, and this springs from the book of Genesis, the idea is that we are all, each one of us, made in God's image. That is the fundamental stuff of which freedom is made. It is God that made us in his image, and therefore we all have equal value to him, and therefore we all have equal rights in each other's eyes. What sort of rights are guaranteed? Rights to be free of government. The right to be free, not the right to other people's things, not the right of the collective to intrude on the rights of the individual. And finally, what is government's role in all this? It is only to protect us from one another. It's to protect us from externalities. That's it. That means that we have to fill the gap that's left by government with a social fabric that's worth fighting for. It means religious communities. It means that we all have to take care of one another on a voluntaristic level so that government doesn't see the need to do it for us. And who are we fighting? And this is the big question. Right now, there are enemies everywhere for the conservative ideology. And it really breaks down into three groups, I think. The people in the Democratic Party, Democrats, the media, and ourselves. Those are the three great threats to conservatism in America today. And I want to go through each one of these and how exactly we go about fighting each one of these opponents. So first of all, the Democratic Party and the left in the United States more generally. Well, the Democratic Party demonstrates opposition to all three parts of these fundamental values that we've laid down. They don't believe that rights are God-given. They believe that rights are government-given. All of your rights spring from the collective. They don't come from some sort of external source. And therefore, if you cross government, government gets to crush you, because after all, government was the grantor of those rights, and government can take away those rights anytime it sees fit. Rights, by the way, are not rights to be free of government. It's not the right to be free or the right to liberty. The right is your ability to succeed in life. And if you can't succeed because you don't have enough of somebody else's stuff, you have the right to take somebody else's stuff. You have a right to housing, you have a right to health care, you have a right to other people's money, you have a right to other people's labor. This is a fundamental tenet of what the left believes. And what is government's role? Well, it's to rectify all the cosmic imbalances that exist in life. Government's role is to make sure that everything is fair. Sure, we're all born with different levels of wealth. Sure, some of us are born stupid and some of us are born smart. Sure, some of us are born tall and some of us are born short, but government can fix all of that if we just give government enough power. And what's interesting is that this philosophy, which seems to have infused a huge part of the country, the fight for that philosophy has really failed, I think, over the last 100 years, even though it really ought to have succeeded. It's kind of an attractive philosophy because it allows you to press your failures on society and everybody else. If you just do poorly, then it's somebody else's fault. So how do Democrats fight for this flawed philosophy of their own, this idea that fairness matters more than liberty, the idea that equality of outcome matters more than equality of opportunity? How does the left fight for that? Well, it started off with this sort of democratic Marxist notion that eventually there'd be class warfare, and the class warfare would elevate the poor above the rich, and they would get their central premise, the idea from each according to his ability to each according to his need. But that would come through democracy. We'd all sort of band together along class lines and fight with one another. When that didn't materialize, they moved on to a different theory, and that was the idea that they could impose from above through a bureaucratic oligarchy what they wanted. Instead of having elected branches of government, the people weren't going to go for this crap. So instead of having elected branches of government, instead of that, they would just use the bureaucracy to ram down what it is that they wanted through a series of regulations that none of us could actually stop or answer to. And then even when that wasn't enough, they fell back on the new form of the left philosophy. And that is, they used to divide us by class, and now they've decided to divide us by race, by sex, by sexual orientation. This is the left's central goal in life now, is this theory that started on college campuses and is very dominant there. I speak on lots of college campuses every year. This is the dominant prevailing theory, and that is intersectionality, the theory of intersectionality. So for those who don't know, intersectionality basically posits that everybody has their own perspective, but perspectives don't matter. All that matters is identity. So there's a hierarchy. If you are an LGBT person, for example, you are at the top of the hierarchy. It means that your opinion matters more than everybody else's because you've been most victimized. People who have been most victimized get the most credit. And then below LGBT folks, it's black folks, and then below black folks, it's Hispanic folks, and then women, and then Jews are down here, and then way down at the bottom are straight white males. Right? Those are the people whose opinion means nothing, and those people must be shut up. And you see this in how the Democratic Party conducts its politics, right? Hillary Clinton had to be nominated not because she was good at anything, obviously. She had to be nominated because she was a woman, and therefore her opinion mattered more than anybody else's. And the real problem with intersectionality is not just that it divides American from American, but what it also says is that if you are lower on that intersectional hierarchy than somebody else, and you speak to them in a way that they don't like, that is an act of violence. And so you're starting to see these sort of outbreaks of violence at, for example, Trump rallies, where leftists are so insulted that people who are not left, people who are not part of this intersectional hierarchy, straight white males, are talking, that they actually think it's okay to go and engage in violence. And this has infused the entire left mindset now, is the idea that words are aggression and that words are to be met with violence. And the example that comes to mind for me, I don't know, this is one of my favorite stories, so I'll tell it, because it's a good personal example. How many in this room have ever seen CNN headline news? Show of hands, CNN headline news. Right, that's the entire viewership for CNN headline news. So if you recall back to about mid-2015, the big story in the news was that Caitlyn Jenner, who's an LGBT person, and at the top of the intersectional hierarchy, Caitlyn Jenner had just come out as Caitlyn Jenner, a brand new woman, and the only question in the country was whether this person was a hero or the greatest hero. And so CNN Headline News decided to do a segment about ESPN, because ESPN had decided to give Caitlyn Jenner the Hero of the Year award, because there is something deeply heroic about a person who has a mental disorder having a surgery. Right? This is something that is deeply necessary to give awards for. So as you can tell from how I talk about this, my own view of this particular issue is that men are men and women are women, and people who suffer from gender identity disorder or gender dysphoria, depending on whether you're dealing with the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 4 or 5 definition, people who deal with that disorder are dealing with a severe mental disorder, but it is idiocy to pretend that men are women and women are men. This is just silly talk. So, CNN Headline News is looking for someone to defend this view. So they look in the phone book under conservative. I'm the only one in a 30-mile radius of their headquarters in Los Angeles. And so they call me up, and they say, why don't you come in and we're going to debate this thing? And so the producer comes to me and he says, we here at Headline News have no ratings whatsoever. And I said, I'm well aware. And he says, so because of that, what we would really like is for you to come on and speak your mind. I said, well, you're going to get it. And he said, I also used to produce for Jerry Springer. Now, it was at this point that I probably should have thought better of the proposition. But being the intrepid sort, I thought to myself, well, I can handle this. So we get into the room, and it's Dr. Drew's show. So Dr. Drew's show is a panel show, and in this particular panel segment, it's Dr. Drew and 2 of his friends on the stage, and then there are 3 people and me in sort of facing him. So it's me against 6 people on the left, which makes it almost fair for them. So we start this debate, and the debate is, again, is Caitlyn Jenner a hero, or is Caitlyn Jenner more heroic than the people who stormed the beaches at Normandy? Is Caitlyn Jenner somebody who deserves an honorary burial spot at Arlington National Cemetery, or is Caitlyn Jenner somebody who should actually just be granted a chariot ride with Elijah up to heaven directly? Right? And that's how the debate went. It was really like on a scale of 1 to infinity, how great is Caitlyn Jenner, and you have to start at infinity. And so finally they come to me, and I say exactly what I've said to you, which is I don't understand why we as a society are giving heroism awards for somebody having a mental disorder. That doesn't seem like something that's good for people who have mental disorders. Generally, is for society to humor them. As somebody who has mental illness that's run in my family, my grandfather was schizophrenic. The idea that anybody would have said to him when he was having these episodes, yes, Nate, the radio is talking to you. And now we all ought to just act like the radio is actually talking to you. This would not have been a good solution for him, and it's not a good solution for mentally ill people to pretend that society is just going to form itself around you. It's foolish. So I neglected to mention one thing, which is that the person who's sitting next to me, as I mentioned, the producer was a Jerry Springer producer. The person who's sitting next to me was a person named Zoe Tur. Zoe Tur is formerly Bob Tur. And Zoe, so Zoe is sitting next to me and getting very hot under the collar. And Zoe, I say this, and Zoe says in a voice approximately an octave lower than my own, says, Zoe says, you don't know anything about genetics, little boy. And I said, well, I know enough about genetics to know that every cell in Caitlyn Jenner's body has a Y chromosome in it, except for some of his sperm cells. And he keeps repeating this. He keeps saying over and over, you don't know anything about genetics, little boy. So finally, I say, all right, well, what are your genetics, sir? And he reaches over and grabs me by the back of the neck on national TV. You can see the clip on YouTube. It's pretty amazing. He grabs me by the back of the neck on national TV, and he turns to me, and he says, if you say anything like that again, I'll send you home in an ambulance. And honest to God, my first thought was, that doesn't even make any sense. You don't go home in an ambulance. But what I actually said was, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political conversation. And the entire panel turns on me and says, how dare you say that to Zoe? How could you offend Zoe that way? That's just terrible that you would say something like that to Zoe. Never mind that an assault and battery just occurred on live national television. How dare you say sir to a biological male? Obviously, this is the intersectional hierarchy at work. This is the idea the left is pushing, because the idea is that if I even tell this story and people laugh at it, it's a funny story. If I even tell this story and people laugh at it, it's because we're obviously not in the intersectional hierarchy of suffering, and we're evil people, and we're bad people, and therefore we have to be shut up, and our political viewpoints are worth nothing. That's basically the idea of the left. By the way, the harassment went on after that. As Zoe goes hulking off the set, he turns to me and says, I'll see you in the parking lot. And I said, no, you won't. And then later on Twitter, Zoe threatened to curb stomp me. I mean, honestly, all of which I thought was deeply unladylike behavior. So that's enemy number one we have to fight, is this intersectional theory that really is just a stand-in for Marxist theory. They used to divide us by class, now they divide us by race and sexual orientation and transgenderism and all the rest of the various labels they throw around to people. The nice thing about being a liberty-minded person is that you really don't have to care about what anybody else does in their personal life. It's one of the beautiful things about it. But folks who are Democrats don't believe that. They believe that it is deeply incumbent that they care about what we think. So that's enemy number one that we have to fight. Enemy number two is obviously the media. So the media that President Trump rails against consistently, routinely, and generally correctly. The media are not interested in truth, obviously. They are interested in a partisan agenda, and they are interested in forwarding that partisan agenda at the expense of truth on a routine basis. And you can see that happening in the news pretty much every single day. I mean, obvious example, today there was a news story that was promulgated by the Washington Post saying that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, he was asking the diplomats not look him in the eye. Absolute crap, just made up out of thin air, not true. The media ran with it, and of course this was a headline at the Washington Post, and people started retweeting it, and in the time that it takes, everybody to debunk this thing, it's already gone around the world twice. And this is another example, what the media have done to Mike Pence in the last 3 days, over Governor Pence having what I think is a very honorable position, which is I'm not going to put myself in any sort of position of temptation, and I'm never going to put myself in a position where anyone can accuse me of having had an affair with anybody, with any woman, and therefore I'm going to guard my marriage, make it sacrosanct. And the left immediately says, well, this means that he thinks women are inferior. It's amazing. The same people who think that Teddy Kennedy's a hero for driving a woman off a bridge to her death think that Mike Pence is some sort of great villain because he wants to preserve his 30-year marriage with his wife by being careful around women who are not his wife. It's amazing. The Democrats are very angry that Mike Pence will only have dinner with his wife, and they are perfectly happy with the fact that Bill Clinton will only have dinner with women who are not his wife. The final enemy that we have to fight in terms of the battle for conservatism is, and this one is the hardest one because it's always the hardest one, is ourselves. And this is the one that I think is the most serious for us because, look, conservatism should be riding high right now. The Republican Party is in control of all branches of Congress. Barack Obama has slaughtered the Democratic Party at the local level all across the country. This should be the high point, the high watermark for conservatism, and it isn't quite. And the reason it isn't quite is because there is significant disagreement about means and ends and significant disagreements about the central philosophy. Just because people win doesn't mean they're right. Okay. What we have to fight in ourselves is the temptation to power. It is easy to fib in order to achieve power. It is easy to make promises that you can't keep in order to achieve power. Democrats have been doing it for a full century. It is easy to play whataboutism, saying, okay, well, our guy did something bad, but their guy did something even worse. It's easy to do that. The whole point of conservatism is that you don't do that. We have a different standard for ourselves because our standard is better than their standard. The idea here is not, our guy did something wrong, oh, well, you know what Bill Clinton did, or you know what Barack Obama did. No, the idea is that's why we don't like those people, right? So the easiest path to power is to imitate the left, to polarize people, to use polarizing language to go after people, to make promises that you can't keep, and to follow the leader, because people always worship a leader. People always like the guy who's on stage. People always like the person who's in power. And it is imperative that as conservatives we recognize that the central principle for which we stand is that power is not worthy of respect unless it is power in service to your rights. Okay, power itself is worthless if it is not in pursuit of the truth. And fibbing and lying and twisting the truth, none of this is okay just because you like the R by somebody's name. This is the battle that we as conservatives have to fight with ourselves. So, how do we fight Democrats? We'll start with that. First of all, you have to refuse to surrender on character grounds. So every Democratic argument basically boils down to, you're a bad person. Every single one. It always boils down to you're a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. Hillary tried this on Trump all the time throughout the campaign. It failed because it's not a good argument, and particularly because Donald Trump did have an advantage that no one else in the field had, which was that most Americans basically had a general concept of Donald Trump long before this campaign started. So it's a little bit hard to portray him as a hood-wearing member of the KKK when people had seen him on The Celebrity Apprentice. Right? So that's something that most Republicans don't have. So in conversations we have with normal people, people on the left, the idea is always that within the first 5 minutes, they're going to go to you're a bad person. And the only way to debunk that is by saying, look, if you accuse me of being a bad person on the basis of no evidence, that makes you a bad person. We cannot accept their character argument. The left bases its entire philosophy on unearned moral superiority, this idea that they're better than you. But there's no evidence they're better than you. In fact, there's a good shot that based on the way they act in life, they're probably worse than you. Because I gauge people and how good they are by what they do for their family, what they do for their community, how many jobs they create in their business, whether they provide people goods and services without imposing on others. The left judges you on whether they think that your intention is good, and your intention can include oppressing other people. And so it's important to point out that they do not have the character high ground. Once you remove the character high ground from the left, there's not much that they can say, which means that, second, we have to speak the language of morality. The big mistake I think that a lot of Republicans make, and I won't name any names like Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, but I think that one of the big mistakes that so many conservatives make generally is that we speak the language of accountants rather than speaking the language of morality. And that is that we'll talk about the efficiency of our policies. Capitalism is wonderful because it makes people more wealthy. Right? Free markets are great because they create competition and because they change the supply-demand curve. Right? You think anyone cares about that? You think anyone has time for that? The reason the left wins, the reason that Bernie Sanders, who is an actual loon bag, the reason that Bernie Sanders can win so many votes is because all he does is speak the language of morality all the time. Right? It's an immoral language that he's speaking, but what he says is life is unfair, and therefore we need government. Right? That's his basic pitch. And it's true, life is unfair, but that's not a good reason to need government. Life is unfair, but what makes it more unfair is government. And the fact is that if we do not speak the language of morality, then the left ends up winning the field. This is something I think that President Trump gets on a gut level. He does speak the language of right and wrong. I don't always agree with his assessment, but he speaks that language pretty clearly and convincingly. If you look at every issue, if Republicans argued on efficiency, they lose. If they argued on morality, they win. This is why I don't think that Republicans, conservatives should run away from the abortion issue. It's a winning issue. Pretending that folks who think that you can kill a baby in the womb at 8 months have the moral high ground is just asinine. And it's not true by poll data. The vast majority of Americans disagree far more with the Democratic platform, which says abortion up to point of birth, than they disagree with the Republican platform, which is pro-life. And there's a reason for that. People generally don't like killing babies. And it's almost impossible to make the argument that you are not killing a baby when you are killing a child in the womb, particularly late term, but it's true all the way through. There is no good moral argument that this is not a life or a potential human life, and this is why the left does such a tremendous job of twisting itself into knots, pretending that that it's just a kidney, and doing all they can to pretend. But that's an argument we should be making. It's a moral argument. On economics, our argument should not be, it should not be, this is where we lost on healthcare, I think. Our argument should not be that our healthcare system is more efficient in providing goods and services to everybody. The argument should be, you do not have the right to force a doctor to care for you. That is enslaving the doctor. You cannot do that. You do not have the right. You don't have the right to put a gun to the head of anyone else and demand that they pay for your health care, because that is theft. And the fact that the right doesn't say this, the fact that the right instead pledges things like, we're going to take care of, we're going to make sure that pre-existing conditions are covered under insurance, okay, that is not a conservative position, and it is conceding the very moral ground that Republicans say they stand for, and it leads to single payer. It does not lead to a free market in health care. Okay, The same thing is true when it comes to foreign policy. So if you take a look at foreign policy, and what you see very often is that the right will argue that the left-wing view is just ineffective, that it's just not effective in generating more American freedom. The fact is that it's not about that. It's about there is something immoral about saying to groups of people who are suffering all over the world that sure, we can help you, but go screw yourselves, because we think that we're the bad guys, right? There is something immoral about saying that America is the bad guy, which is basically the left's perspective on foreign policy. Whether you tend to be more isolationist or whether you tend to be more interventionist, the left's perspective is isolationism because America is evil, not isolationism for practical purposes. And that's something that has to be fought. And finally, when it comes to fighting Democrats, if you're going to compromise, you have to compromise on policy but not on principle. And this is the mistake that conservatives always make. We compromise on principle, and then we compromise on policy. It is possible to say, look, the best deal that we can cut right now is the deal that's on the table. But what we can't say is that deal reflects our principles when it doesn't. You can make the practical argument without sacrificing the political principle at stake, but conservatives don't do that. We tend to say, no, what we're fighting for right now is not only the best thing that we're fighting for, it reflects all of our principles, and it's generally not true. Okay, so how do we fight the media? This is a big one, because I think that the easiest thing is to debunk the media. We can do it all day long. But the problem is, what do you supplant in favor of what the media is doing? The reason the media are bad is not just because they're left-wing. The media are bad because they lie. It's not just because of their political perspective. It's because they say things that are not true. And if we on the right substitute our own untruths for the untruths of the media, we're not doing ourselves any favors, and we're actually leading to more untruth generally. If we fight the media with truth, we can win. If we fight them with our own version of falsehood, then we are going to lose in the long run, because no one's going to know who to trust, and all they're going to do is look to the person who they think they can trust based on some sort of emotional standard rather than a factual standard. And that means holding our politicians accountable on our own side of the aisle when they're not telling the truth, being very specific in making them tell the truth. Instead of doing this sort of routine where a wonderful reporter named Selena Zito has said about President Trump, for example, that people ought to take him seriously but not literally. Okay, I think people do take him seriously but not literally, by the way. I think there's truth to that formulation. However, it is a mistake not to point out when Donald Trump says things that are not true, that they're not true. The reason that it's a mistake not to do that is because now you are opening the door to the media to turn around and say, no, but he's lying. The best thing that could have happened on this wiretap thing, for example, is for people to say, look, Trump was just doing what Trump does. He was watching Fox News one day. There was a chyron on the bottom of the screen. He tweeted it out, which is pretty much what happened. Instead, we've had 3 months of this routine already. What we really should be focusing on is where Trump actually is correct, right? Where Trump actually is correct is that the intelligence community under Barack Obama was leaking and unmasking material about the Trump transition team. That is 100% true. Conservatives would be much better off saying, yeah, all that wiretapping stuff, like there's not a lot of evidence of that. Instead of trying to defend every double down from President Trump, we'd be much better off saying, yeah, that was a bunch of, that was silly. Move on with your life. But here's the actual scandal, because there's no actual evidence of this one, but there's lots of evidence of this one. Let's talk about where there's evidence. Otherwise, we're undermining our own credibility, and we're not doing Trump any favors. Right? Because if Trump thinks that the best strategy is to double down and people are just going to go along with it, he'll keep saying silly things on Twitter knowing that people are going to double down with him. We don't want him doing that. We want him pursuing good policies and saying true things, which he is fully capable of doing. Finally, how do we fight ourselves? Number one, don't make promises you can't keep. There is a great tension in American politics between promising people stuff and lying to them. This is the great tension in American politics. People vote for people who lie to them about giving them things, and then they don't like it when they're lied to. The problem is you're always lying to people when you say you're going to give them things. So we need to break that. We need to cut that Gordian knot. We need to say, look, here's the truth. We're not going to give you anything other than the opportunity to be free, and we're going to get people out of your way in order for you to be free. We as conservatives need to value truth over power because power without truth is meaningless. Winning without truth does not mean a damn thing. If we win, and then we go along with fibs because they're politically convenient, if we win because we want to go along with fibs because they're politically convenient, all we end up doing is growing the size and scope of government and making way for a bigger government with more lies, not a smaller government with fewer. And finally, I think that we have to fight reactionary tribalism. You know, we're living in a very reactionary era where there's this easy temptation to say to ourselves, okay, here's a person the left hates. That means that they reflect conservatism well. This is not true. There's a difference between being anti-left and being pro-conservative. There's a massive difference. Just because someone bashes the left doesn't mean what they're saying is true or right or good, that they're promulgating messages that are going to result in long-term victory for a movement worth fighting for. It is incumbent on us to do our research before we embrace public figures and just decide they're good because they piss off the left. It turns out nearly everything pisses off the left. There are no shortage of people in America who piss off the left. Just because something pisses off the left doesn't mean it's something that we ought to root for. And so we ought to be very careful about the people who we appoint our spokespeople, the people who we decide to follow, the people who we say are good representatives of our positions. The last point of all, and that is, I started this by saying that our central principle is God-given rights, and that means that we have to have faith. The same God who gave us our rights also granted us an ability to fight for them. John Adams wrote these words sitting in this state, sending a letter to his wife back on their farm in Massachusetts on July 3rd, 1776, the day of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He said, "I'm well aware of the toil and blood and treasure it will cost us to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yet through all the gloom, I can see the rays of ravishing light and glory. I can see that the end is more than worth all the means, and that posterity will triumph in that day's transaction, even although we should rue it, which I trust in God we shall not. Posterity will only triumph if we fulfill our sacred duty, and as our fathers and mothers did before us. We have before us a sacred task, and it is a sacred task, of a great restoration. We must all trust in God, the same God who gave us our rights and gave us our freedoms and gave us this unbelievable country, that we take a hand in rebuilding the towering edifice of American liberty. We can do that if we stand with truth, if we stand with God, and if we stand with the individual. Thanks so much. I'm happy to take questions. Oh, there's a mic on there.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, we did questions, yeah. I'm happy to do, so there's a mic down here. I'm happy to do questions on anything that you want to talk about also. So the Q&A is actually more fun.
If you have a question, come up here. We'll try to take a few questions before we have dinner. Anybody have a question? Right here, sir. Real quick.
We talk about the people of the Jewish faith. Why is, I mean, you're very outspoken conservative. Why are so many of the Jewish faith so liberal when you look at national policies? The conservatives seem to want to defend Israel. I mean, can you give an explanation about what their thoughts are and why they're like
this? Actually, so this is the question that I get the most frequently for people who can't hear. He's basically asking why Jews vote left. And the answer is because most Jews are not Jewish. This is the actual answer. By religious propensity, by religious practice, the vast majority of Jews do not observe really any form of Judaism. They're the most atheistic ethnic group, ethno-religious group in the country. There's a difference between being ethnically Jewish and religiously Jewish, right? The Orthodox Jews actually vote something like 70-30 Republican. People who are, as you get more observant, just like with most religion in America, as you get more observant religiously, you tend to become more right-wing. And that's true for Jews as well. So it's actually not a great shock. It's very weird, actually, that people say, you know, why do Jews vote so left? It's sort of like saying, how do people who are born Catholic vote? It's not a really meaningful statistics because there are a lot of lapsed Catholics, and they probably vote to the left. So you actually have to look to the practice. People who are practicing Jews vote largely conservative.
Okay, sir.
Hi, Ben. Pennsylvania has a pretty unique constitution in that for juries, they're given the power to judge both the facts of the case and the law of the case. In other states, this would be known as jury nullification. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not, and one of the purposes of having juries in the first place was the possibility of jury nullification, actually. If you wanted a judge to just apply the law, then you'd never have jury nullification. I mean, it's something that's taken place throughout American history. Is the people saying, people on a jury saying that, yeah, this guy's guilty under the law, but we don't care. That's one of the features, not one of the bugs of the system. So it's not something I'm ardently against.
You talked about the tyranny of regulators. What do you think of the idea that we can win back and expand our majorities by defining the Democrats as the undemocratic party that thinks unelected bureaucrats ought to run the country, and us as people who think that elected representatives of the people should run the country?
You know, I think that it's a great pitch. I think that this is something actually, this is one of the areas, as you may have noticed. So on my podcast, I have a popular podcast that is named after me, and on the podcast I do a routine called Good Trump, Bad Trump. We actually have a theme song, and one of the things that Trump has been consistently good on is regulation. Trump does understand this, and one of the most popular parts of his agenda is the idea that he's going to slash and burn the bureaucracy. Most Americans hate the bureaucracy, most Americans hate the regulators, and they should, because it is immoral to have a bunch of unelected bureaucrats sitting in offices without any sort of oversight who get to define the vast majority of things that happen in your life. And one of the great tragedies of American governance since the beginning of the 20th century is the abdication of the legislature in favor of these regulators, because you have an interest. If you're a legislator, you have a tremendous interest in never being held accountable for what you do, so you just pass a vague law, kick it over to the regulators, and have the regulators fill in the gaps, and then if it goes bad, you blame the regulators, and if it's great, you take credit. But that's not how the system was supposed to work, as you point out. Virtually all regulatory agencies should be immediately dismantled, and if Congress wants to pass a law, they can damn well pass a law themselves.
So Ben, I think most people would agree with me that economics are downstream of politics. It's my opinion that politics is downstream from religion. Do you think that America is finally ready for an honest dialogue on religion and what political systems come from it?
So I missed what kind of religion you're talking about, sorry.
I'm saying in general.
Just a religious revival? Yes, I think that listen, I think that, this isn't me, this is Alexis de Tocqueville. Alexis de Tocqueville said, when he toured the country in the 1830s, he said what made America different from every other country on the face of the earth was not our Constitution, it was not our Congress, it was not our freedom of the press. What made us different from every other nation was the fact that virtually everybody belonged to a social institution or a church. And the reason that was great is it meant that you had support systems. So the most effective argument the left has is, but who will take care of the poor, right? The most effective argument they have is, but who will take care of the unfortunate? And the answer used to be in America, we will. Right? Me and my religious community will take care of somebody in our community who's failing, and we all do. We all give charity, right? Red states give vastly more charity than blue states. Religious people give vastly more charity than people who vote Democrat. And so you know, I think there does need to be, in order for there to be a revival of conservatism, I think there has to be a simple answer to this, and that is that Americans are an unbelievably generous people. We are still the most religious Western country in the world. But that needs to kick up a notch, and we do need more people involved in their community in a way that allows voluntarism and charity to take the place of government and force.
Thanks, Ben. I enjoyed your podcast as well. Just wanted to ask you about the Obergefell decision and your opinion of the decision itself, as well as what your long-term view is for how we define marriage in the future and going forward.
Okay, so the Obergefell decision is legally a disaster area. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that states are barred from regulating marriage to be between a man and a woman. My personal view of the same-sex marriage issue is that government should get completely out of the business of marriage, ultimately, altogether. And the reason I say that is not because I believe in the morality of same-sex marriage. I'm an Orthodox Jew, I don't, right? The reason that I say that is because if states enshrine same-sex marriage alongside heterosexual marriage, what they are going to do next is they are going to use that as a baton to wield against churches and religious institutions and religious schools. They're going to say, we have a law in the books that says that straight marriages are the same as same-sex marriages, and then there will be a church that says we're not going to perform a same-sex marriage. And they'll say, well, you're now discriminating under the discrimination law in our state, and so we're going to withdraw your tax-exempt status. And there's good precedent for them to do something like this. Bob Jones University case in 1981 did this with regard to interracial dating, right? I'm not against interracial dating, but the government does not have a role here. Doesn't matter, that's what the government will do. The government will now crack down on a bunch of religious institutions because people were too stupid on the right to say, just get the government out of it completely. By the way, if you think that the government has done a wonderful job promoting marriage, I would recommend that you look around. The government's done an absolutely horrific job promoting marriage. The fact is that for me, as a religious person, I have two marital documents. I have my one that's my religious marital document, my ketubah, and then I have one from the state. The one from the state is buried somewhere in my garage, and the one that's signed by a rabbi is the one that I actually care about, because that's the one that said that I could have sex with my wife and have babies with her. So my view is that if you privatize marriage, you'll be doing a world of good, because government poisons virtually everything that it touches.
Hi, Ben. So I'm 18, and I like to debate with people my age, but I would like to ask what the best way to do that is, especially in this age where when they're wrong, they get louder and yell.
I mean, I think that you first have to determine whether a debate is worth debating. So this is always what I say to college students particularly, is that, and it's true for everybody, we all spend a lot of time on Facebook arguing with Aunt Ida, who's an idiot, and on your deathbed, you're going to look back and think to yourself, I wish I had those 2 hours back. As you choke out that last breath, you're going to think, Aunt Ida. And so just think to yourself before you start a debate, is this productive? And there are really only a couple reasons it's productive. One, the person is convincible. Two, the audience you're speaking in front of is convincible. If you're doing it in front of an audience, your goal is not to convince the person you're talking to. Your goal is to humiliate them in their position as badly as you can possibly do. So that's my debate recommendation.
Hi. Earlier you talked about we don't want our conservative elected officials to ride in on a wave of lies as opposed to truth. Is it discouraging to you to see President Trump eliciting such support for such polarizing views, and then even to see some within the Republican Party having to jump on board along with those views?
It is disturbing to me that there are lots of people who are willing to follow a leader wherever he will go. And so this is why I say that President Trump should be held to the exact same standards which I held President Obama, and this is why I thought Obama was a bad president. Right? He should be held to the standard of truth and conservatism. When he does good stuff, I am more than happy to praise him. I hope I spend nothing but the remaining 198 weeks of his first term praising him. But he's going to have to do good stuff in order for me to do that. And yes, it is disturbing to me when he says things that are eminently untrue, and then people immediately shift their position in order to meet him halfway. I don't think that that's an appropriate thing to do. My position didn't change just because President Trump was elected, and it wouldn't have changed if he wasn't elected. I think that this is what I say about principle versus policy. And that's true not just with regard to dishonesty, it's also true with regard to actual political principle. And to give a couple of examples, forget about, Trump is not a Russian agent, okay? There's no evidence that Donald Trump is working for Vladimir Putin and he and Natasha are occupying the basement of the Russian embassy. Okay, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. So far, it's all a bunch of crap, and the media's been overplaying it. It is true that President Trump was very warm toward Russia in his public rhetoric during the campaign, and that had a marked impact on Republican opinion vis-a-vis Russia. You can look in the public opinion polls. The approval ratings for Vladimir Putin went up by something like 20%, and that's almost solely due to President Trump. The same thing has happened with free trade. It used to be the free trade was a basic stock and trade Republican position, and that's taken a significant blow under President Trump, and it's going to continue to take a significant blow. This is not stuff that I approve of, and I think honestly, it's disturbing to me, and I think that I think it's incumbent on people who know better to stand by principle and say when they disagree with President Trump. Again, there was the argument to be made during the election cycle. It wasn't fully convincing to me, but it was at least an argument with some credibility, which is, okay, you may disagree with him, but shut up because he's fighting Hillary. That was an argument. It wasn't my favorite argument, and I like it very much, but it's an argument. He's no longer fighting Hillary. Now he's the president. Do we get a good presidency or a bad presidency? If you want him to succeed, then he should be doing good things with his policy, and you should be holding his feet to the fire.
Hi, Ben. I'm a small business owner, and a lot of the left tends to add socialist tendencies and policies towards my arguments as a small business owner. What's the best way for me to combat those arguments, and what is your opinion on that stance as being a small business owner?
Well, I mean, I think that the easiest thing to say as a small business owner to people is, I'm hiring you. I mean, this is one of the great myths of American politics, is that the poor are somehow screwed by the rich. There's not a poor person in America who's ever worked for anyone except a poor person or the government, except for a rich person or the government. Right? Nobody has ever worked a job for a poor person, because poor people have no money. They can't pay you. Right? You've never been employed by a poor person. Right? The fact is that most people who start small businesses are not raking it in hand over fist. Most people who are starting small businesses are surviving on the margins of their business until hopefully they're able to build something bigger. The antipathy toward business by the Democratic Party is actually evil because it is based on the notion that money itself is corrupting. And then the minute I wish somebody would ask Bernie Sanders this. You know, Bernie Sanders, who owns 3 vacation homes. I wish somebody would ask Bernie Sanders this at some point. He keeps saying that rich people are screwing poor people. At what point did they become evil? When they were poor, they were nice. Like, is there an income point where you make $1 above that and then suddenly you become an evil user? Like, how did that happen exactly? Did it just magically happen? You were infused with the spirit of Satan when you made more than $100,000 a year? It's absolute bigotry against people who attempt to earn. And it's not just, I also, by the way, hate the distinction between small business and big business. Business is business. A big business is a more successful business than a small business unless it's getting some sort of, magical deal from the government, in which case they shouldn't be doing that anyway. So whenever people say like small business, virtuous, big business, evil, it's like, no, people who are engaged in private sector transactions and voluntary transactions are doing good for the world regardless of whether they're successful or unsuccessful.
Mr. Shapiro, it's a pleasure to finally be speaking with you. So at colleges nowadays, they teach a lot about inclusivity, and so I'm very curious as to know what your preferred pronouns are.
Oh, yeah. So, somebody asked me this once, but I'd been watching Game of Thrones a lot, and so I suggested that everyone had to call me Your Grace. All of this is so stupid, but it is a deeper underlying condition in politics. My subjective truth, I'm living my truth. There's no such thing as your truth. Your truth is bullshit, okay? There's just the truth, and then all the crap that you're spouting right now, right? So this idea that I'm supposed to change the pronouns that I use because you have a different perspective on what pronouns I ought to use about you is an imposition on me. You know, this is my the whole transgender debate, I think, is so stupid because I don't care what you do. If you want to have hormone treatments, if you have this difficulty, if you want to dress how you want, if you want to have surgery, if you want to do all those things, I could not care less about that. What I do care about is when you are saying that you're going to force me to use a pronoun that is not factually true about you, and then force me to teach my children things that are not factually true.
So I have a quick question, which is, when in your life did you discover that the thug life had chosen you?
So for those who haven't seen, there's this series of videos on YouTube called Ben Shapiro Thug Life that were created by some guy in New York, apparently. I don't know him. And he took all of the clips of me kind of destroying college students at my lectures or destroying Piers Morgan or any of these, and then he basically put in a graphic of sunglasses coming down on my face and put a blunt in my mouth and then starts playing rap music in the background. I mean, the thug life chose me at birth. I knew from the time I was a child. As Lady Gaga might say, I was born this way.
And Ben, we have one more question for you.
Hi, Ben. I was wondering what advice you might have for students or parents or prospective students on where they should go to college. One of my biggest concerns is that the majority of universities in today's culture and society almost have a socialist bent to them, and I'm worried that will only go further as we advance as a society.
Yeah, so I think that we have to do an honest assessment of ourselves and our kids as far as colleges. So if your kid is not solid in a conservative perspective and goes to a lefty college, they will probably come out a leftist because apathy tends to lead toward leftism. If you want to go to the cool kid parties and smoke dope and do all the things that college students do, then and you don't care about politics, you'll probably end up embracing lefty positions because it's not popular to walk into parties with a book of Hayek under your arm. I know, I've tried. So it's that said, if you are strong in your conservative positions or in your conservative principles, then I think a left college is the best place for you because you can go and you can test your arguments against the other side's arguments, learn their arguments, learn how to counter those arguments. UCLA was a great place for me because I had very strong principles going in, and so it was a wonderful place for me to learn the other side's arguments. Harvard Law was great for me because I was able to go there and sharpen those arguments, learn their arguments as well as they know their arguments, and then figure out exactly what's wrong with those arguments and learn how to pick them apart. So it can be, the phrase that I use about this is that lefty colleges can turn coal into diamonds. I mean, it's a very pressure-filled environment, but only if the coal can stand up to the pressure and not crumble. So you have to determine whether your kids are capable of that. If not, there are colleges like Liberty, there are colleges like Hillsdale, there are colleges like King's College. There are colleges that are out there that are more steeped in kind of classic tradition, and I think that those are wonderful places, whether you're conservative or liberal. I think that those are wonderful places to go. So that's my general take on all of this. But all I would say for young people is that now's the time. If you could do anything as a young person right now with regard to politics and the news, I would just turn off the news for the next 2 years and just read philosophy. Get your central principles straight, and then when you come back to the news, you'll understand it better. You know, instead of reading CNBC every day, go and read Hayek. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.